Hey friends, welcome to Flight Test Tech. I'm Josh. Today we're going to be showing you how to build our sub 250 gram tiny tutor. Now this tiny tutor is fantastic for both getting in the hobby, being able to enjoy flight in your backyard, at a park, and many other locations. One of the best benefits of this is it's under 250 grams, which means there's no regulations that apply to this model. Now we put a lot of passion in designing this tiny tutor. Now it may be a representation of the bigger tutor, but a lot of the features of this airplane have been changed to make it truly an amazing, easy to build and gentle flyer. You're gonna have this plane ready to fly in as little as an hour and a half. So if you're ready to build along with me, all you need is your hot glue gun, some tape, a knife, a pair of pliers, and of course your speedboat kit and a power pack A. Let's go ahead and get our materials in order and we'll get started. All right, so the first step we're getting started on our tiny tutor is with the wing. The nice thing about this wing is there's no ailerons on it, which means no servos. This is gonna build really quickly. All we need to do is pop out our pieces, we'll identify them, and then we'll get started. Now that we have our pieces popped out, let's take a moment to identify them, and at that point, we'll go ahead and clear out the foam, do our bevel cuts to help the wing take its form. First, we have our right wing, the bottom skin and the top skin are joined together, and we have our left wing. This little piece right here is our dihedral gauge. This dihedral gauge is really important to get the proper amount of dihedral to help this plane self-correct and self-level. Let's go ahead and put our dihedral gauges aside. We'll take our razor blade now and we'll start going through our score cuts to clear out the channels. Whenever we're clearing out our channels, make sure that you don't go all the way through the facing paper on the bottom side. Just score as close as possible, and it's really helpful to take a piece of sandpaper or a piece of concrete and dull the very tip of your blade so it doesn't cut through the facing paper. Once we've done our score cuts on the trailing edge and also the center leading edge, we can now crack open the trailing edge 180 degrees and then using our thumb, remove the foam. Now that our foam is removed, we're also gonna do a double bevel cut. The double bevel cut is gonna be right along the inside of our leading edge, and the way that we're gonna do that is we're gonna fold it over 180 degrees. We're gonna use our razor blade, and if you're using our flight test knife, we can detent the razor blade 1 detent, which will give us the perfect posture to be able to properly do a bevel cut. The easiest way to do a bevel cut or a double bevel cut is to be able to bring the area that you're cutting right to the edge of the table. I'm gonna turn this 180 degrees so you can see exactly how I hold my knife, but for you, you can actually turn this against the edge of the table facing towards you and do it much easier. You can see I'm letting the back end of my blade ride right against the surface of the foam, and I'm placing my blade in an acute angle right on the other side of the facing paper. And this gives us the right posture, so once we start dragging this through, you're gonna see it cuts very easily. If you hold your blade at a 90-degree angle, it's gonna be very easy for it to fish back and forth. If you also go to cut through the foam and you notice that it's balling up and tearing a lot on you, that means your blade is dull and you'll wanna replace it. Let's go ahead and do the other side now. Again, we're placing our blade just above the facing paper right in the center, making sure our thumbs are away at all times and guiding it through. Always make sure whenever you're doing a double bevel, especially for the leading edge, that you can easily bring this up at least 90 degrees without any resistance. If you can't bring it up 90 degrees, all you simply need to do is go back and take a little bit more off. Don't worry how this piece looks because this is going to be completely covered because it's folded over. You can always use the extra pieces of foam included in your kit as scrap and being able to practice your bevel cuts. There we go. Let's go ahead and do it on the other side. This time I'm going to take it to the table and show you the angle that you can do it to make it easy. So you can see I have my folder right at the edge of the table, and now I'm going to use my knife and I can easily guide it through. Always make sure that you keep your hands and fingers away from the blade. Go from one end to the other. That's perfect. Feel free to pause the video now and make sure that your pieces look just like this, and we're ready to move on to the next step. With our hot glue heated up, we're gonna practice our C-fold on the back. Now our C-fold is actually gonna be exactly like what it sounds like. We're gonna be folding this over 180 degrees, and the paper on the back is gonna give us a nice clean edge, but also a lot of strength. Always make sure before you glue anything down that you do a practice fold to make sure everything fits right. And we're gonna put just a simple stripe of glue right down the middle here. We're using the FT300 glue gun. I have my temperature set to medium, and this is the exact setting that really helps you to be able to glue plenty, but also dry quickly. There we go. We're gonna hold this down for about 30 seconds, and we can release. Next, we're gonna go ahead and take our thumbs, put them right over the center score cuts, and we're gonna lift up, and as we fold over the wing, we'll be able to let it establish its airfoil. Now, once we're getting it fold over, you're gonna feel some resistance right here, and that's exactly what we want. And as we fold this over and hold it down, we wanna make sure that the lower surface of the wing is flat against the table, the center section that's right over top of the spar is parallel to the bottom surface, and that the trailing edge touches the back of the table. Now to help the wing hold its form, we're gonna take our hot glue gun, we're gonna make sure we have plenty of glue inside, and we're gonna press a small ribbon of glue right inside that score cut on both sides. Now notice I'm not going all the way to the wingtip, I'm just starting and stopping right where the spar is. Now I can go over and I can fold it down, practice that maneuver again, but notice I'm not holding it down. I'm just going down for about 3 seconds, lifting up, going down for 3 seconds, lifting up. This is because I don't want to glue the spar to the top wing skin quite yet. And there we go. Now you can see that the wing is holding the perfect airfoil that we need. Now that we have our airfoil shape, we're gonna place a bead of glue directly down the leading edge and on the very top of our spar. Make sure you have an extra glue stick handy because you don't want to run out of glue at this point. So I'm gonna start and stop about 1/4 inch from the edge. Nice healthy bead of glue here, and a little stripe right down the top of the trailing edge. Now we can fold this over, and again we're using flat spread out hands here to be able to spread it out so we don't dent our foam. And we're gonna hold this down for about a minute. Once the glue is fully dried, you should be able to lift up your hands, and if the wing doesn't spring open, you're good to go. We're now done with one half of our wing. Let's go ahead and do the exact same process on the other half. Again, we're gonna practice our C-fold on the very back here, make sure that it folds over nicely. Once we practice that, we can place a bead of glue right on the trailing edge and fold it over. And after about 30 seconds, we can release that, and we can take our thumb and our fingers and we can press down, helping the airfoil to get its shape. As we fold it over, we'll press this down to make sure that the bottom surface of the wing is flat against the table, the spar is parallel to the top skin and bottom skin, and the trailing edge is touching the back of the table. Now that we're happy with the way it fits, we can lock in our airfoil by simply placing a thin bead of glue down right over the score cuts. And then we'll just press it over. We'll hold it down for about 3 seconds. We'll lift it up, back down for about 3 seconds, lift it up. And then after about 5 or 6 times, you'll notice that the airfoil is locked in and we're ready for our next step. Now that our airfoil is locked in, we're gonna place a healthy bead of glue starting and stopping about 1/4 inch from the edge of our glue seam. And then one on the very top of our back doubler. Let's go ahead and fold this over. Using spread out hands, we'll hold this down for about a minute until it's fully dry. Good. After about a minute, we should be able to raise our hands and none of the wings should move. In other words, the trailing edge should stay flat against the bottom of the table. The front portion of the wing should also be flat against the table as well. Now would be a good time to check and make sure that both your wing halves have the exact same form. So when you push them together, the trailing edge, the middle of the wing, and the front leading edge all line up with each other. Once you're happy with that, we can fold this over 180 degrees. We can line up the bottom of our wing surface, and we're gonna lock this down with a piece of tape. This tape is going to help act as a door hinge, so that way we can hold this together, and as we use our dihedral gauge, the bottom surface of the wing will not spread apart. And speaking of our dihedral gauge, we're now going to clip this right over the center section where our spar is on one of the outboard left or right wings. It's really important that we can easily press down on the center section of the wing and that the whole left wing or right wing is flat against the table while the other wing goes up evenly. Once we're happy with this, we can open this up much like what you would with a door. We're going to place a healthy bead of glue on one side of the wing. And then we'll set it back down on the table and hold it in place. Now we're going to let this dry for about a full minute because we do not want to rush this process. If this glue is weakened at any time, the wings is simply not going to be as strong. To add extra reinforcement, we're going to rip off a little tiny scrap piece of foam and we're going to place a bead of glue right on the very top. Now we can go back with our scrap piece of foam. I kind of like to bend it like a squeegee. We're going to go right over the top, press it into the seam, and also remove any excess. All right, we're gonna remove our dihedral gauge, and as you can see, our wing is now complete, and we're ready to move on to our next step, which is the fuselage. Let's first start by popping out all the pieces that we have for our main fuselage, and also getting the lower piece of the fuselage and popping that out as well. Here you see the two main pieces of our fuselage. We have our main fuselage and our lower fuselage plate. Our next step is to remove the foam from the strategic areas, mainly the outside of the bottom plate and also the center sections of our fuselage on the main plate. And the easiest way to remove the foam on your fuselage is once again bending it over 180 degrees and using the tips of your fingertips to roll out the foam. Take extra care right around the center section of this area here because this area is going to be a little bit more delicate and pop out a little bit too easy. Anytime maybe you're not happy with the amount of foam that's been removed, you can always go over with the tip of your razor blade and just scrape it out. Along with removing the foam in the areas that need to fold over, we're also going to go ahead and pop out our little slot for the rear rudder, our rudder control horn, and we're going to do a single bevel cut on the windshield side on the front of the fuselage. Make sure all your pieces look just like what we have here. We have our lower plate with the outer edges of the foam removed, along with the space of the middle for our C-fold for our front landing gear. On our main fuselage body, we have the 2 center sections removed of our foam cavities to give the ability to have your B-fold, and we also have a single bevel cut up by where the windshield is. Now at this point, we're going to practice our B-fold, and before we do, we're going to lift up the trailing part of our fuselage up a little bit right over the edge mark. This is going to give us the ability for the side of the fuselage to adapt to the top plate or the bottom plate. To practice our B-fold, we're going to keep the top plate, in this case of the fuselage, flat against the table, and we're going to rotate the side fuselage up 90 degrees. This way the top plate is beside the bottom plate, and if you notice the cross section here, that's exactly what it indicates. Now a good way to have this at 90 degrees is by using one of our triangle squares. We have a wonderful thing called the Crafty Kit. The Crafty Kit gives you your glue gun, your triangles, your razor blade, markers, tape, and so much more. All right, we have it. It easily reaches 90. We have this bent in. Now we can take our hot glue gun, and we're going to focus, in this case, the hot glue right up against the side plate. And right when we get out where this wing cutout is, I'm going to go ahead and turn my hot glue gun down 90 degrees. I'm going to focus it so the glue meets the paper, and then I'm going to turn that back up and hit that side plate one more time. Let's take it up 90 degrees. We'll use our triangle square and just hold that in place and give it about 30 seconds. And we're going to do the same process on the other side. Again, we're going to go ahead and bend up the back trailing edge. We're going to rotate this up 90 degrees, making sure we can easily press this against the table. If you have any foam bits in there that's kind of lifting you up, go ahead and remove that now. And once we're happy with that, we're going to focus the glue on the side, and then right where this wing cutout is, we're going to turn this down, focusing on the paper, and then back up against the side. This is just simply to make it a little bit easier when we cut out that center section. And we're going to press firmly against the table, hold it at 90 degrees, and we'll use a triangle square as our friend to get the angle. Now that our side plates are glued down and they're 90 degrees, we're going to work on the front of the fuselage. Let's go ahead and first use the score cut in the middle here, and we'll do a practice test fit to make sure that everything fits down nice and neat. We're going to do this one piece at a time. So after we've done our test fit here, I'm going to put a bead of glue right on the bevel cut, and I'm going to focus my other glue, starting and stopping about 1/4 inch from the edge on both sides of the windshield. Now I can fold this down. I'm going to bring this over to the table, use the table as my friend. I'm going to press this down. Using the table as your friend is a really good way to get you a nice solid glue joint, but at the same time not burning your fingers. After about 30 seconds, we can lift it up. Everything looks really nice and clean. And now we can lift up this other plate. We'll place glue on both sides. 1, 2, and back down on the table. I always like to give a little bit of an inward pressure, and if any glue ever squeezes out, I simply wait about 5 seconds and then I move it over. You're going to notice a little tiny piece of paper on the very front. That's just to kind of seal off the foam board, and all we need to do is put a thin bead of glue there, take our scrap piece of foam, and fold it down. I like to kind of rub back and forth here just to kind of keep it down, and if there's any extra glue, wipe it off. Now the front of our fuselage is done, let's go ahead and put our attention towards the back. We have a similar situation here that we had with the front windshield and the front of our nose here, is we have a score cut. We can kind of open that up now, and we can give a quick test fit by simply pressing this down into place with our fingers and make sure that everything lines up. Now this center section is going to be a little bit more challenging because of the nature of it. So the easiest way to practice to make your table as your friend is you basically take it from the one angle to the other angle, and you can press that down. Once we're happy with that, we'll open it up 180 degrees. We'll place our glue on both sides. Again, I like to start and stop about 1/4 inch from the edge just to keep it from squeezing over. Now we can lay it back down. Get it right where we want, press it inwards, then right down to the table. As I'm pressing down on the table, I'm also using the tips of my fingers to softly press inward evenly, making sure we don't dent the foam, but everything is mating up nicely against the top plate. Give us about 30 seconds, and it looks great. Same process on the last one, but this one's a little bit more challenging because it's kind of hard to make the table your friend, because you can see here, this back hits it. Easiest way to do that is to take it over to the edge of the table, and then you can hold it down. So again, we're gonna fold this over 180 degrees, bead the glue right between the paper and the foam. I like to always kind of press it in, get it set up where we want it, and then we'll take it right to the edge of the table. There's one side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then the other side. Now while we have the top plate done, let's carefully go ahead and cut out the center section of our wing that's going to give us access to our servos. All we simply need to do is kind of connect the dots, keeping in mind that you may have a little bit of glue that's squeezed over, and we may have to carefully cut that out. There's one. The top side of our fuselage is now done. Let's go ahead and put our energy towards the bottom. Before we put this on, we're gonna go ahead and address the very front of this, and this is gonna be another C-fold here. Our C-fold is gonna go over 180 degrees, leaving a flat square edge on the very front. Once we're happy with our C-fold, we can place some bead of glue right down on the top, and I like to put just a little bit more than I normally do. Normally I'm saying more glue is not more strength, but because the landing gear is gonna press up against this layer, I want it to be nice and solid. Gonna move that around. Make sure the very front is nice and flat, and then press it down into place. Now to both save weight and actually give the ability for the foam to curve gently, I'm gonna peel up this piece of foam that you see right here. I'm gonna take it right to where we just glued down, and I'm gonna carefully rip it across. I'm gonna do the same process on the back side now. Keep in mind, whenever we peel this paper off, it's gonna make the foam a little bit more delicate. So make sure you take your time and handle it carefully. Now that we have the bottom plate prepared, we're gonna go ahead and do a test fit, and we're gonna slide this in. I always like to kind of start towards the center of the fuselage, move the foam board going towards the back. We're gonna open this up ever so gently and lay it in place. We always try to do a test fit on our pieces to make sure everything fits properly, but it also gives us good motor memory to be able to glue it down again. Now what I like to do is, while I have everything down, I like to lift up one side or the other. In this case, I'll go ahead and do the front and glue that down because everything is lined up for me. I got plenty of glue in my glue gun. I'm gonna place a healthy bead of glue right between the paper and the foam. And I'm also gonna come back and I'm gonna place a bead of glue right on this doubler plate just to give it a little bit of extra strength. Now I can fold it over, and working from our seam forward, I'm gonna press it into place. Take a little scrap piece if we want, and then right down to the table. And because this is kind of curved, I like to press it down and rock it back and forth. And we get a nice solid glue joint. Now we have the front lower portion of our fuselage done. I'm just gonna stick my finger in this lightning hole, fold this over 180 degrees. Always check to make sure you have plenty of hot glue, and place a thin bead of glue right on the paper and the foam. Our goal is to keep this below 250 grams, which is easily done as long as you don't put too much hot glue in it or extra paint. Again, we're laying this down, back down to the table. And I'm just gonna kind of pull this forward because there's actually, believe it or not, a slight curve. And there we are. Our fuselage is now done. Our next step is to prepare the two pieces for our tail and install them. Our first step here is we're gonna locate both our rudder and our elevator here, and we're gonna pop out our pieces. So our tail is made up of two different pieces. First we have our elevator. Our elevator has our horizontal stabilizer and our elevator. And our rudder has our vertical fin and the rudder itself. The elevator gives us control over pitch. The rudder gives us control over yaw. You're going to see a score cut on both sides of the elevator and the rudder. This is going to be where our elevator is going to move and our rudder is going to move, but to do that, we have to do a single bevel. Now for the elevator, we're going to do our single bevel on the stabilizer side, just so we have as much meat and strength on our elevator as possible. To do this, we'll fold this over 180 degrees. We'll take our razor blade once again, detented one time. We'll lay this right above the facing paper, and we'll cut our bevel. It's really important whenever we cut a bevel for our hinges that we make sure there's no resistance at all when we move it up or down. A lot of times it's very easy to have a little bit of meat between the facing paper, and that will cause it to be able to resist a little bit when it pulls. If you feel any resistance, go back one more time with your razor blade and get it closer to the facing paper. You can also use sandpaper in this step to be able to see on a nice smooth edge if you have a hard time cutting with a razor blade. We'll do the same process now on the rudder, except this time our single bevel is going to be on the rudder side, on this side right here. And again, we're going to check for just free motion, making sure there's no binding whatsoever. Now these bevel cuts are very good to give us the ability to move it, but for longevity and durability, we're going to go ahead and reinforce this with a thin layer of hot glue. The way that we're going to do this is we're going to have a little tiny piece of our scrap foam. We're going to take our hot glue gun, and right where the paper and the foam meet on both sides, we're going to put a very, very thin ribbon of glue. Now we don't want to leave this on just as it is, so we're going to come right across, and we're going to take our scrap piece of foam and wipe off any excess and thin everything out. Our goal is to leave no excess foam, but to push all the remaining hot glue into the foam and the paper below. An easy way to remove any kind of tackiness is moisten the tip of your finger and wipe it right on the very top of your hinge line. This will keep it from binding and let it flow nice and free. And once again, we check for freedom of motion. We're going to place the very tip of our nozzle right down between the paper and the foam, and then come right back with our hot glue, squeegee, and squeegee off any remaining. It's always helpful to keep that extra scraps of foam board handy for squeegees, for practicing, or even for making extra parts. Now that we have our hinges established, I'm just going to break the little tab on the very bottom here and fold this over 180 degrees. With our hinge line facing down, we're going to slide this in and rotate it 90 degrees. Our rudder should tab right into our elevator, and we want to make sure that it stays at 90 degrees, so we'll keep our little triangle square handy to make sure it does so. Once we've done our practice fit, I'm just going to lift this up a little bit, place a bead of glue between those two notches, and then press it down into place. Again, you can use a scrap piece of foam if you need to wipe off any extra foam that you may have on either side. And what I like to do is come back with a triangle and hold it in place until the glue is fully dry. Now we're going to place a little drop of glue right where this bottom notch is. We'll fold this over and line it up. Remove any extra glue that you may have with a piece of scrap foam. Now that we have our tail assembly glued together, let's go ahead and do a practice fit into the fuselage. The easiest way to do this is I like to kind of start the rudder and rock it forward. You're going to see two main notches for the tail. We're going to just simply press that down in and press the center notch in. Make sure when you're doing this test fit that the bottom of the elevator sits flush against the top of the fuselage. Also, check with your triangle gauge to make sure that your horizontal stabilizer is 90 degrees to the fuselage sides. Once we're happy with the fit, we can lift this up carefully. We're going to put a thin bead of glue on both horizontals on the top of the fuselage, and I like to put a thin bead of glue right where the rudder is going to go. Pass that through carefully. And we'll press that right down into place. I like to give this a couple seconds here. We're just gonna take our triangle gauge, make sure that it's 90 degrees, and then we'll hold it in place for about 30 seconds to a minute. Now that our main fuselage section is done, we're ready to move on to our next step, which is installing our control horns, push rods, and servos. Now before we start with our control horns and push rods, we're gonna go ahead and first get our servos out of our Power Pack A. We're gonna center them and also select the right servo arm. If you're new to Flite test, we have different Power Pack sizes: Power Pack A, Power Pack F, Power Pack B, Power Pack C, and a lot of times other value bundles here that give you exactly what you need. The cool thing about this is all these electronics are specifically spec'd out to be a great performer with great power and efficiency for all of our models that they're linked to. This Power Pack A gives you your motor, your speed control, 4 servos, servo extensions, linkage stoppers, and so many other great tools. All you're basically gonna need beyond this is your battery charger, and your transmitter receiver. We only need 2 of the servos that are included in our Power Pack A, so we're gonna keep the other ones right here in the box. One of the great things about our new Power Packs is we have a brand new style linkage stopper that's even easier to install. For this application, I'm gonna show you how to do Z-bends because we get to install the servo exactly where it needs to be, and you guys can save these for later builds. A lot of times when people are building, especially their very first model, they think more control is gonna be better for them. More control oftentimes leads to a very squirrely airplane, so picking out the right servo arm for your application is really important. In this case here, we're actually gonna use these small little servo arms that you see right here. You're also gonna notice here some extra hardware. You can choose to save this, but the 2 main screws that we want are gonna be the smallest and the shortest stubby screws that you see here. These extra hardware we can move to the side, and you can always save that later for another application. Now we don't need the 4 arms on these servo arms, so we're gonna take our razor blade, we're gonna flip this over, and because all the arms are equal distance here, we're just gonna cut off 3 of them. 1, 2, and 3. First thing we're gonna do is we're gonna press down our servo arms so facing away from each other at close to 90 degrees. Now we're gonna go ahead and use our screwdriver and put our stubby little servo arm screw in. In our Crafty kit, we actually give you a multi-tool that has your 1.5, your 2mm hex, 2.5, and even the proper Phillips head. We also have on our older Power Packs, screwdrivers like what you see here. And you can see as I screw this down, I'm slightly moving this back and forth, and that's okay because we'll use a servo centering tool to help us center it back up. So included in our Crafty kit, and you can also get this separately, is something called a servo centering tool. Servo centering tools do exactly what they sound like. You can cycle a servo, you can actually move it around, or you can center it. To power this, you can either use your ESC plugged into the little in port where you have signal, plus, and minus. Plus is positive, minus is your ground. You can also do this off of your battery by simply going to your balance lead, lining the 1 red wire up with the plus, pressing it in, and you're gonna give this approximately 1 cell of battery voltage, which will be plenty to power your servos. Another really cool way to do this, if you don't wanna plug it into your balance lead, is by simply taking one of our little easy batteries that you see here, lining up the positive and negative, and the pin spacing is perfect. There's a little button here on this lower corner, and you can see that we can go from manual to neutral to auto. Auto will cycle it back and forth. Manual, you can turn it. Neutral is exactly what it is, it's neutral. Let's go ahead and plug these in real quick. I'm gonna go and do both of them. And again, I'm lining up my negative with my ground. My positive is in the middle, and the yellow or the white wire will be signal. And you can see both of these are now centered, but I can now go to auto, and I can test them to make sure that they're working properly. And I can also go to manual and move them around. We're gonna click it one more time. We're gonna go to neutral, and you can actually see one of my servos are off a little bit. So I'm gonna go ahead and fix that right now. The importance of doing this beforehand is because if you went ahead and neutraled this out and you didn't check it and it was off, when you glue everything in together and then you power in your receiver, suddenly your controls are gonna go one way or the other, and you're gonna have to trim that out. And sometimes if it's extreme enough, you won't be able to do so easily. There we go. We're gonna go ahead and keep this handy here. I'm gonna unplug this now, and if at any time we end up bumping our servos, we can always go back, recenter them, and continue on. Now that we have our servos centered, we're gonna put our attention towards our push rods and control horns. In our hardware pack, you're gonna see that we have two 16-inch push rods. We're gonna go ahead and pop those out now. And we also have at the very bottom, a couple control horns. Now we only need two, one for the elevator, one for the rudder. We're first gonna put our attention towards the rudder, and you're gonna notice that there's a little tiny cutout right here on the rudder that will give the ability for it to move back and forth. We don't want this to have any binding, so we're gonna go ahead and take our push rod, we're gonna slide it through the slot that's gonna pass through. We're gonna go back and forth a couple times and open it up. We can now take our control horn that's gonna glue to the rudder, we can slide it into place. And we're gonna push the whole push rod through. And what I like to do is kind of snag the other end with my finger and pull it to the top. Now we're gonna do a quick test fit here. We're gonna press this down. And what's very important is we wanna make sure that the point of the hole of our control horn is directly over our hinge line. This is gonna give it even deflection in both directions. I always like to move it back and forth, make sure there's no resistance. And once we're happy with this, we can open this up, put a couple drops of glue right in that slot that we created, and press it down into place. It's really important whenever you're working with gluing your servos down or your control horns down that you don't rush this process and you don't move it until it's fully dry. Because if it's weak and it comes loose in flight, you're gonna lose control of that control surface. We're gonna give this a good minute to dry. We're gonna check the controls, and then we're gonna move on to the elevator. Now the control surface is dried, we can move it back and forth. We don't wanna feel any resistance at all, and this is great. Let's go and do the exact same process now on the elevator. First gonna open up our push rod slot. Just simply go back and forth a few times. And then I like to keep this a little bit on the closer side, so I'm gonna go ahead and bend it through so it does exactly that. We can now pass the push rod through. I'll snag it. And we'll press it down right over that little slot and put it into place. Again, the main thing that we're looking for is we wanna make sure that the hole is directly over the hinge line, and it is. Now that we're happy with it, we can pull that out. Place a bead of glue down in there. And press it in place. Just like our rudder, we're gonna give this about a minute to fully dry, and we'll move on to our next step. We're gonna do a simple Z-bend right roughly in the center of this opening that you see here. Now you can use Z-bend pliers, but they're getting pretty hard to find. I'm gonna show you how to do it with simply a pair of pliers. So I'm gonna grip the push rod roughly 1 inch in front of this opening here. And holding my finger under the push rod, I'm gonna bend this 90 degrees vertical. You can see when I brace it how nice and sharp that 90-degree bend is. Now I'm gonna grip the push rod wire about 2 millimeters up, and I'm gonna bend my wire 90 degrees towards me. Now this is what we affectionately call a modified Z-bend. The reason we call it a modified Z-bend is because we can actually rotate the push rod into our servo horn. In this case, I really want a standard Z-bend. So I'm gonna cut this about 1/4 of an inch from the very edge. There we go. And now I can grip my push rod. I'm gonna brace this, and I'm gonna rotate it 90 degrees. This simple process produces a really great Z-bend that's really easy to do and also incredibly accurate. We're gonna do the exact same process on the other side now. I'm gonna go ahead and bend it roughly where it was before. Again, I'm making sure that I'm gonna put my finger right on the bottom so I'm not putting any extra stress on the push rod. 90 degrees vertical. And in this case, I'm gonna bend it 90 degrees away from me. There we go. Now we have our modified Z-bend. We're gonna grip this, support the wire, slowly bend it over. Now, as I mentioned before, we're gonna be gluing the side of the servo directly against the side of the fuselage. But if you have a sticker in the way, all you're doing is gluing the sticker to the fuselage, and that can result in some failure. So because this is gonna be right up against the fuselage, I'm gonna pull off the sticker, make sure there's no slimy sticker stuff in there. You can always use a little alcohol wipe to wipe it off. And I'm gonna take my razor blade, and I'm just gonna scuff it up. You can also use a piece of sandpaper if you want, but what you wanna do is you wanna just carefully rough up that surface so the glue has something to bite into. Or anytime that you accidentally maybe bump your servo, you can always use a servo centering tool and recenter it. All right, now I'm gonna go ahead and carefully pass the push rod right through the servo arm and bend it around. And at this point, wherever I glue this is gonna be wherever center is. It's really important to make sure that your servos are properly centered. Once we're happy with this, I'm gonna place a drop of glue right on the side of the servo. Nice healthy drop. I'm gonna bring this down about a full inch below the top of the wing. And now I can move this back and forth until we get this perfectly flat. I can even use a scrap piece of foam here to hold this against it and get it just perfect. Just like our control horn, we're gonna grip this and we're gonna hold this in place for a good minute to let it fully dry. I'm just gonna pass this one wire down, keep it all nice and tidy. And we'll do the same process on the other side. This side's not gonna be gluing on the sticker, so all I need to do is scuff it up. Just lift up my push rod. Slide it on. And I always kind of like to get an idea where level's gonna be and where it's gonna place. And I also wanna make sure that we're leaving the servos roughly about 1 inch down below the top of the fuselage. That looks good. Okay. Come back here, put a drop of glue, right down into place. Use a scrap piece of foam just like I did before. There we go. And we'll just check that out. And we'll hold it in place. And now we have all the servos that we have installed to be able to operate both our elevator and our rudder. And on this airplane, that's all you're gonna need. One of my favorite features on both the Tiny Tutor and the main Tutor is the position of its landing gear. We're gonna go ahead and bend that and install that next. Included in the kit is this length of landing gear wire that you see here. The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna use our ruler. Again, if you need a ruler here, we have a really great steel one in our crafty kit. And we're gonna measure this, it's about 15.5 inches, which means we're gonna go to 17 3/4, and we're gonna bend it 90 degrees. Once we have our 90-degree bend, we're gonna measure 1.25 inches on both sides. Once we grip it at 1.25 inches, we're gonna bend that roughly down 90 degrees. It's always a good idea that if we bend one side, you can kind of go back and pre-measure, and if you're slightly off for any reason, just match that measurement. So as you can see, the landing gear doesn't look very good right now, but that's okay because all we need to do is start spreading it out and making it nice and even. I like to lay this flat on the table because whatever side is high, when you press down on one side, just simply bend that out. Now we can continue to kind of spread this out a little bit. You don't want your landing gear to go straight down, but you want it to actually protrude outwards to give you both stability and proper handling on the ground. That looks great. We're now gonna measure 3 inches from our last bend. We'll mark it with our finger and we'll bend it straight out. Make sure that this bend is parallel with the very first bends that you made. And again, I always like to kind of just check it. If we're off a little bit, the important thing is that you match the other bend, not necessarily the measurements you started with. At this point, we're going to use a table as our friend, but this time it's going to be to make sure that both the wheel axles are at the proper angle. So when I lay this down, I want to make sure that this is straight. Easy way to do that, kind of hold it against that. Just bend this one down a little bit. Come up a little bit more. There we go. And our last measurement is going to be roughly 1 inch from where our last bend is. This is going to give us the right length for our wheel shaft. Also included in our kit are 2 wheel collars, so you don't have to worry about globs of glue on this one. All we're simply going to do is put the wheel collar on the outside and tighten it down with an Allen key. Now's a really good time to check to make sure everything looks good with our landing gear. We can do any kind of last minute bends that we need just to make sure that it's both symmetrical and even. There we go. You're going to notice 2 hash marks on the side of your fuselage. This is going to be the area where our landing gear is going to protrude outwards and go down. It's really important that we match it up with these 2 hash marks because too far back, the plane's going to flip over easily on takeoff and landing. Too far forward, it's not going to handle very nicely. What I like to do is I like to take my landing gear, I like to center it up right over those 2 hash marks. Once I get it to where I like it, and everything looks even, I simply press this down and make a dent in the foam. I can now take my razor blade and I can carefully go right over that indent, and I'm only going to cut through the very first layer of foam. There we go. You can even take something like a screwdriver or a scrap piece of wire and kind of press this down in and open up this cavity. Put a little bit more care right where those 2 notches are. There we go, a little rocking motion's all we need. And let's go ahead and press this down in. I like the way it looks, but I don't like how narrow my landing gear is. So I'm just going to open this up again a little bit more to make it look more like a stall aircraft and give it a wider spread. Let's try that. That's much better. You can see the stance is nice and wide in the landing gear. In this case, the landing gear is spread about 7 inches. You don't want to have too narrow a landing gear because the plane will wobble a little bit easy and it won't handle well on the ground. Once we're happy with this, once the plane is sitting nice and level, we can then pop out our landing gear. We're going to come back with a bead of glue and press a bead of glue right down inside that seam. We'll reinstall our landing gear. Press that right down in there. I like to always check one last time, make sure it's nice and flat. Then we can come back with a bead of glue right on top. And smooth it out with a scrap piece of foam. Pressing this glue down gives you a lot of extra strength, but you want to make sure that you let it fully dry before moving on to the next step. While our fuselage is upside down, we're going to put a little tiny tail skid on the very back that'll help us track and also protect the tail. We're going to take one of our included barbecue skewers, and we're going to take the pointy end, and you're going to see just a little tiny notch with an angle here. We're going to put a little tiny drop of glue, and using the pointy end of the barbecue skewer, we're going to press it in, and then I like to cut it about a ½ inch off. Now, if you're planning on decorating your airplane mainly with decals and not painting it, now would be an excellent time to easily be able to apply our decals for the windows that are included with our kit. Our crafty kit includes a lot of different colored tapes that make it easy for you to decorate your airplane without adding a lot of weight. Now that we have our window decals on, we're gonna go ahead and find the little tiny holes that are in our fuselage. And I always like to go ahead and pop one hole at a time and then pass it all the way through. This keeps you from accidentally going out of a different hole and causing problems. I always like to leave about maybe a ½ an inch excess on each side, just to make it easy for the rubber bands to go down. Again, we're gonna go on one side, then on the other, and then pass it through. Our landing gear is on, our fuselage is officially done. Let's go ahead and put our attention now towards the power pod, and then ultimately we're gonna hook up a receiver, put it together and go fly. The two pieces that we're gonna need for our power pod are gonna be our main foam board power pod and our plywood firewall. Let's first start by going over our score cuts and removing the 2 channels on our power pod. Same process as before, we'll fold it over 180 degrees and remove the channel from the middle. You're gonna notice on the power pod that we have an A-fold. An A-fold is where the side plates are above the bottom or the top plate. To do a proper A-fold, we're gonna leave the side plates this time against the table, and we're gonna fold up the bottom plate 90 degrees. All the time that we do this, we always make sure that we press the plate that we're folding firmly up against the table. Once we're happy with the way everything fits, we're gonna put a bead of glue on the bottom of the side plate, starting and stopping about 1/4 inch from the edge. Once again, the side plate goes down to the table, and we fold back up 90 degrees. Hold this for about 30 seconds and let it fully dry. Same process now on the other side. We're gonna once again practice our fold, side plate against the table, fold up 90 degrees. There's no resistance. So now we can go back and we can put our bead of glue, focusing on the bottom of the side plate. We always want to place our glue where it'll give us the most amount of strength. Again, back up 90 degrees. And we're going to hold that for about 30 seconds. Now that we have our power pod made, we're gonna notice that there's a 90-degree end and there's also an angled end here. And the easiest way to tell is when we put this on the table, if it's going perpendicular, that's the back side. If we flip it around and you see it's going off to an angle, that's gonna be the front side. Another easy way to tell is look at the very top of the A. The direction the A points to is gonna be our firewall side. We're gonna go ahead and place the firewall side facing away from us, the flat side being back towards us. And we're gonna take our firewall and we're gonna make sure that the firewall has a square hole on the bottom left. If you accidentally get this backwards, don't worry. This is simply to guide the wires. You can always kind of guide them around, but this makes the installation look really nice. We're gonna mount our firewall right on the very front edge, as you see here. The 2 holes that have the 2 dowel holes for the top that we're not gonna be using in this application will be pointing upwards. I like to just fold this forward, lift this straight back towards me. I'm gonna put a healthy bead of glue right on top of the foam board. Kind of recognize this is kind of squeeze everywhere, so we're gonna have a scrap piece of foam handy in a minute. And I like to rest this against the table and fold this up. Always nice to come back with a scrap piece of foam, wipe off any extra glue that you may have, and let it dry. Now, a lot of times people want to go ahead and start installing their motor at this point. You don't want to do that because a lot of times after a couple flights or maybe a couple noseovers, that firewall and that power pod are going to separate from themselves. To fix this problem, we're going to use some packing tape. We're going to wrap it around the front end and fold it over like we do a gift box. So just under the 2 holes here on both sides, I'm going to press down And I'm gonna take the extra tape, I'm gonna fold it down one at a time. There's 1, 2, and 3. Now, depending on your application, if you're gonna be using a very light 2-cell battery, you can put extra tape on this so when you put your Velcro on and you remove and install your battery numerous times, you're not gonna distort or break your power pod. I'm gonna go ahead and do that right now. There we go. Now before we install our motors, I'm gonna go ahead and take my razor blade. I'm gonna carve out all the different holes that we have to make sure that our screws or wires can pass through. Included in our Power Pack A is gonna be our 1806 Power Pack A motor. Now this has a lot of really great hardware in here, including 2 different types of nuts. One nut's a spinner nut, one nut's a lock nut. And the other part we have is a beautiful CNC prop washer. For this application, we're gonna be using the prop washer and the spinner nut. One of the really cool things about our FT Radial series is these motors are premium motors and they're incredibly durable. We also offer a limited lifetime warranty on this, which means if it breaks for any natural causes, all you do is simply call us, you send in your old motor, and we send you a new one. You're gonna notice 2 different sets of holes on our firewall. The holes that we're gonna use are gonna be the flat, lateral ones that are slightly bigger diameter. These narrow ones are for other motors like our old style 1806 from way back that people may still have. We're gonna go ahead and pre-thread both of our screws through so they can meet the motor. But before we do so, let's go ahead and pass all 3 wires through our little tiny square. I like to leave just a little bit of slack here. It's much easier to line up our screw holes. I'm not gonna tighten down any of my screws until I get them both threaded. It's much easier to do that way. There we go. I can go ahead and pull that right on through. There's 1. And there's 2. Next, we're gonna find our Power Pack A ESC. A couple really important things to note about our FT Radial Power Pack ESCs is they include a little accessory port that you see right here. This accessory port delivers battery voltage, and at no times do you want to plug this directly into your receiver. This is going to be the wire that you're going to be plugging into your receiver. If you want to have things that run off of battery voltage, like optional lights, maybe some FPV, this is a perfect way to be able to plug it in. Also on the bigger models, this can also power your FT Easy ID. All we need to do is we need to connect our 3 connectors. It doesn't matter which order in, because if it runs backwards, we simply just replace 2 of the 3 wires. Now's a really good time to go right back to our servo tester to test the motor direction. For that, we're gonna go to our output. We're gonna plug it in, line in our signal and our ground up, power's in the middle. And then we can take our battery, and we're not gonna power our servo connector, we're gonna power our main ESC. Never have your prop on during these times. You can see my servo tester's all the way turned counterclockwise until it stops. I can now grab it, and what we want to see is we want to see counterclockwise rotation. In this case, we do. If at any time your motor is running backwards and you want to reverse the direction, just pick any 2 of these 3 wires, unplug them, and switch them. Our motor's right in the right direction. We can unplug this, and we're ready to install it into our fuselage. I like to keep my ESC up in my power pod, so in this case what I can do is just take a little drop of glue. You can also use the Velcro that's included as if you wish. And I'm gonna put this right down over top of my Power Pack A spindle. What I wanna avoid is the 2 holes that my barbecue skewers are gonna pass through. Just make sure we don't hit those. That looks good. Then we can just simply fold that down and in. Now you can see that we have our wires, our battery lead, and also our accessory port. Not too worried about the accessory port, but I want to keep the other ones accessible. Guide this up and in. We're gonna run right on the top of the fuselage all the way back until it stops. Now I'm gonna go ahead and press this up firmly against the top, and if we did everything right, you're gonna see that the holes of the power pod match up exactly to the holes of the side of the fuselage. Just like we did with our wing, we're gonna go ahead and carefully go through each side, recognizing the fact that we're gonna have to pop through that tape. 1, 2, Those line up. 3 and 4. Now we can pass them all the way through. Take great care just to make sure you don't shish kebab your ESC. And I like to kind of have these as flush as possible to the side of the fuselage because we're not going to take the power pod out too many times. We still have a whole other barbecue skewer, but I love saving these things. These are beautiful barbecue skewers. So I'm just going to reuse the other one and pass it through and cut it. Our power pod's now in. Let's go ahead and put our attention towards the receiver and getting all the controls working. Now in this hobby, you have a lot of different options when picking your radio. If you're brand new to this hobby and this is your first build, you're getting into it and you're excited, just recognize that you don't have to go expensive to have a really great experience. On our store, we have phenomenal radios ranging from our Spectrum line to our FlySky line and also our Radio Master line. All these radios have unique benefits that make one better for the other, depending on what you're looking for. If you're looking to get in the hobby and still have a powerful radio for a great budget, the FlySky FSI-6X is a phenomenal radio. It holds multiple planes, you have dual rates, expos, mixes, everything you need. In this case, I'm going to be hooking this up to the DX6E because I love training people how to fly, and the DX6E has a really great feature called wireless buddy boxing. It's incredibly easy to use, and it's really functional for me. Sold separately from our Spectrum radio is this awesome little receiver here. It's called the AR410. It's a 4-channel receiver. That's all you need. We're going to go ahead and install that. And the channel mapping for this is going to be that the throttle is going to be in position number 1. And we're going to make sure that our signal, which is on the very top, lines up. There we go. I'm just going to confirm here that I have my throttle channel. Yep. Our signal's on the very top. We're in port number 1. Port number 2 is going to be our ailerons, but in this case, because we have a 3-channel airplane, the directional change and control is done through our rudder. I'm just going to wiggle the servo and make sure I have the right lead, and I do. And I'm going to plug that into port number 2. Always make sure that your signal and your ground wires are lining up. Port number 3 is for our elevator, so we're going to plug that in. Again, making sure our signal's on the top and ground's on the bottom. So with my transmitter powered off, I'm going to go ahead and make my connection with my plane with a charged battery. There we go. On this model, all I simply need to do is press down the bind button and make this flash. Now I can hold down on the bind button on my transmitter and power it on. It's really important whenever you're binding that your throttle is down and you're as far away as possible with an arm reach to the receiver. There we go. I can never stress enough how important it is whenever you're doing these things to make sure that your prop is off. If your prop is on and God forbid something bad happens, this could do you harm. All right, at this point, I'm gonna turn the model away from me, so I'm acting as if I'm flying in the airplane. When I move my right stick to the right, I should see the rudder move to the right. And when I move it to the left, obviously it should go left. Now when I pull my elevator stick back, I should see my elevator go up. In this case, my elevator is going down, and we don't want that. So I'm gonna go ahead and reverse that right now. I'm gonna go to servo setup. I'm gonna scroll over to reverse. I'm gonna highlight elevator. I'm gonna click it. And now you can see when I pull back on my elevator stick, my elevator goes up. When I push forward, my elevator goes down. Let's go ahead and test our throttle real quick. And everything works. Now that we have our controls moving in the right direction, we want to make sure that they have the right amount of throw. As I said earlier in the build, too much throw does not give you more control, it'll make the plane squirrely. This little throw gauge right here is what will help you identify what the proper amount of throw is. And if you did this right and you have the right radio done, you may not have to do any adjustments at all. But if you have too much throw, you can always change that adjustment in your transmitter and dial back the controls. So I'm just simply going to hold this down. I'm going to pull back on my stick. And you can see that meets it perfectly. Let's do the same now for the rudder. And that goes right up against it. That's exactly what we want. If you'd like to dial in about 30% expo, which makes your center movement softer, you're welcome to do so. It's not a necessity, but it definitely makes the plane fly smoother. To get to dual rates and expos, all we simply need to do is press down the scrolly ball, roll down to dual rate and expo. We're gonna go to our aileron, we're gonna go down to expo. I'm gonna dial in 30. And I can scroll up to elevator, 1 over, And once again, dial into 30. If I wanted to activate this on a switch, I could easily highlight this, flip a switch that I like, but in this case, I want to keep everything the same. This plane is meant to be a trainer and to fly very gentle. Let's go ahead and tuck in our receiver, and then we can fasten up our wings, get our center of gravity, and install our props. So I'm going to unplug my battery because we're done with this. I'm going to go ahead and pop my receiver back in the back and get it to a location that's easily accessible. Again, you can use a small piece of Velcro if you wish. We include a nice long piece of Velcro. You can even cut just a small piece of Velcro and stick it on the side. Now, because this plane is under 250 grams, you don't have to worry about any regulations being required for you to put things like remote IDs on it. There we go, we'll put that right there. I'm just gonna fish my little tiny battery lead right up into the front here so I can still easily get it. There we go. And then finally, let's go ahead and put a little piece of Velcro on the very bottom right under my landing gear. If you're using an extremely light battery for flying indoors, maybe something like a 450 or a 650, you're gonna want to install your Velcro on the very top here. If you're using our 800 milliamp 2 cell, you're gonna want to install that right above the landing gear wire. Really important thing to keep in mind is you don't need a lot of Velcro to hold these down, and oftentimes when you put a lot of Velcro in, it can kind of destroy your fuselage as you put it in and out. So for this case here, I got my little battery, I got prickly, I'm gonna go fuzzy on the fuselage. Just stick that right on there, and there we go. Cool little trick here, if you want to remove your batteries easy, just keep an extra gift card in your pocket or your license. You can slide it between the Velcro and your battery pops right out. Now we get to bring our wing in and fasten that down for the first time. We're just going to leave this nice and centered right on the fuselage. We'll pull our rubber bands over and we'll rubber band it down in place. Whenever you're installing your wing, make sure that your wing is perpendicular and also that the center seam goes right down the center of the fuselage. Now would be the perfect time to install our props because we know the motor's spinning in the right direction, we know the controls all work, and our battery is off. We're gonna slide our prop on, prop washer, and finally our spinner nut. Now the placement of our battery is what's going to be able to decide where our center of gravity is. On the very bottom of our wing, you're going to see two little holes. Those two holes are where you're going to want to put your fingers to get the proper center of gravity. Now oftentimes I say a nose-heavy airplane flies poorly, but a tail-heavy airplane only flies once. You want this plane to favor a little bit neutral or a little bit nose-heavy, but never neutral to tail-heavy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you here, when I put my fingers on here, you can see that the tail's down. We're going to go ahead and install our battery. And I don't need to plug it in this time. And where we place our battery will help us have the right amount of nose weight. There we go. Once you get your battery exactly where you like it, I definitely recommend going back in with a marker, put a little mark, write down the milliamp of that battery, and that way every time you install it, you can go exactly to the same spot. Friends, at this point, we are ready to take this out for its very first Maiden. I'll see you on the flight line. All right, friends, we are blessed with a beautiful fall day, and anytime you're looking to fly, especially if you're new to the hobby, pick the calmest and nicest days possible. Anytime you have wind or gusty weather, it's only going to add to the challenges you're going to experience. Now, if you're a first-time flyer here and you want to have the best odds, also check out our video, 6 Tips for Successful First Flight. That's going to give you all the key points around checking your center of gravity, making sure your controls are right, launching into wind, and many other things like that. We got everything ready to fly here. Our CG's dialed in, our battery's installed. We're ready to fly this. All right, let's go ahead and take this off here. I'm just gonna hold a little bit of back pressure to make sure it doesn't tip over, and I'm gonna roll in slowly up to about 3/4 throttle. A little back pressure, and there it goes. And friends, this is hands off. Just climb as straight as an arrow. That right thrust really does a lot of good. Let's go ahead and turn it around. Anytime you're flying an airplane like this, especially with a little tiny 3-channel, keep your movements very slow and very gradual. I like to give myself 2 counts. So whenever I'm flying this, anytime I'm going to the right or the left, I'm going 1 Mississippi 2, about 1/4 inch. That gives you plenty of time to leave, that gives you plenty of time to make any corrections, maybe turn the wrong direction. If you move it really fast, it'll get real jerky, and you don't want that because then you gotta react faster. This plane is right at home flying in small areas. That's why we didn't even need to go out to our big runway. One of the major things that makes this plane kind of different from maybe like the FT Old Fogey or the FT Flyer is you're truly flying the wing. You have an airfoiled wing on here that's giving you a lot of lift, and it's giving you a lot of the principles of flight that you need to know when you're stepping up into additional models. You can see that's a little bit faster than the Old Fogey and the FT Flyer, but that's okay. It's still plenty maneuverable. Let's go ahead and bring it in for a landing here. There we are. Friends, I want to thank you for being part of the Flite Test family. Thank you so much for taking the time to build along with me. I'm really confident the FT Tiny Tuner is going to be a great way to get people in the hobby, but also for those people that want to have a lot of fun under 250 grams. This is an airframe that can truly grow with you. Look forward to building and flying with you next video, and we'll see you next time.